The night before, a man named Frank Clearwater and his pregnant wife had arrived in the village. Clearwater said they had hitchhiked all the way from North Carolina.
When he came in, he had his own gun. He had a kind of a big long-barreled shotgun. And looked like he came out of the hills, too, you know. She said he was Cherokee, you know. Yeah, he looked like one of those mountain men.
They had ready-made cigarettes, which was a very big deal because we were all smoking in those days, and we were smoking cherry bark and things from the ground. And here was a ready-made cigarette. And so I remember Frank Clearwater lit it up, and we passed it around in a circle like a form of communion.
When bullets began to fly on the day of the food drop, Frank Clearwater took refuge with other protesters in a church. As they hugged the floor in an effort to stay out of harm's way, a bullet tore through the plasterboard wall and struck Clearwater in the head. He had been in Wounded Knee for less than 24 hours.
A brother named Strawberry had his hand on the back of his head, and he was holding his skull. And I put my hand on his skull, tried to hold his brains in, and we took him in the clinic, and they couldn't save him.
The first death intensified the government's determination to bring the siege to an end. In mid-April, a unit was put on alert at an Army base in Colorado. According to plans leaked to the press, the government was prepared to move into Wounded Knee with armored helicopters and tear gas.
The White House, the Department of Justice, were concerned with the confrontation going on all during the month of May into the summer. The college campuses, I was told, would be emptying out, and all the adventure seekers would be infiltrating Wounded Knee. I was given a 10-day deadline.
Officials were destabilizing the occupation using covert tactics.
I have some information I think that you'll be interested in, and it's based on a source that we have utilized in the past and has furnished us information in the past within Wounded Knee. Now, very frankly, I cannot identify him for obvious purposes.
There were almost surely spies within Wounded Knee. The U.S. government had infiltrated the American Indian movement like it had infiltrated every political organization in the U.S. during that time.
AIM knew that they had spies in their midst, and that was part of the FBI's game. Not just to have the spies to get information on what AIM was doing, but to get AIM guessing as to who those spies were, to get them paranoid and pointing fingers at one another.
What is that? What did you point at me?
One effect of that paranoia inside Wounded Knee is that there are purported cases of people who disappeared and who were thought to have been killed, mainly because people didn't know who they were and who assumed that they were spies.
I got daily reports. I got informer reports. This information came to me through the tribal government and through the FBI.
On April 26th, Wounded Knee sustained the heaviest barrage of gunfire since the start of the siege. When the shooting subsided, Buddy Lamont, a 31-year-old Oglala from Pine Ridge, came out to investigate. Lamont was a Vietnam veteran who'd been in Wounded Knee since the beginning.
Everybody started getting up and going back to about the normal routines, and Buddy got up and walked over to the trenches where we were at. A sniper at a good 1,000 yards hit him squarely in the heart. And he wasn't even aiming the gun. He had his back turned, you know, and his weapon was on his shoulder. You know, to me, that was murder.
Negotiators agreed to a ceasefire so that Lamont's family could bury him at Wounded Knee. On May 6th, Buddy Lamont was laid to rest next to the victims of the 1890 massacre.
They asked me if I would say a prayer for him, which I did. It said 2,000 people came and one remained.
Buddy Lamont's death becomes really the final blow to a lot of people inside Wounded Knee, especially the Oglalas from Pine Ridge. He was somebody that everybody knew his mom, and he was there for all the right reasons, fighting for something that he cared about. And for Buddy Lamont to die was more of a tragedy than most people could bear.
Fool's Crow and the other Oglala leaders had had enough. Despite AIM's objections, they insisted on bringing the occupation to an end. On May 8, 1973, after 71 days, the siege of Wounded Knee was over. In final talks with the government, AIM leaders agreed to disarm and submit to arrest. But many of the protesters were already making other plans.
We asked the medicine man, we said, we want to get out of here. We don't want to leave no weapons here. So he says, we'll have a ceremony tonight and we're going to pray. So we prayed all night long.
We sang this American Indian Movement song, an honor song, a memorial song.
So it started getting cloudy. The night evening started raining, wind, rain, so they couldn't shoot the flares.
Lots of people walked out. The spirits had a lot to do with it. The one that brought us out was an owl. And every time he'd hoot in a direction, and then we'd go that way. And they did it right under the marshals' noses.
As the protesters fled Wounded Knee, a triumphant Dick Wilson toured the remains of the town.
Dick, are you surprised at what you're seeing?
I expected this.
Why?
They're hoodlums, clowns. This is the way they live.
Not only was Dick Wilson still firmly in charge, he would exact revenge on his opponents as the federal government looked the other way.
The Oglalas don't like what happened. And if the FBI don't get them, the Oglalas will. We have our own way of punishing people that way.
Shooting on the reservation?
You said it. We'll take care of them.
After Wounded Knee was a period of time that the dissidents called the Reign of Terror. It was a time when Dick Wilson truly unleashed his forces on the folks who had supported Wounded Knee.
In the 3 years following the siege, 2 FBI agents and more than 60 AIM supporters were killed, giving Pine Ridge the highest per capita murder rate in the country. As the reservation spiraled into violence, the government went after AIM in the courts.
One thing that Wounded Knee gave the federal government an excuse to do was to try to litigate the American Indian movement out of existence.
You and your bunch of hoodlums take over down there, you destroy people's property,
Within months, more than 500 indictments were brought against AIM members, most on minor charges that were later dismissed.
They succeeded in tying up AIM in court, and AIM at this point, with all those resources going into court, lost its way.
AIM fell into disarray and violent infighting, and would never again have the impact it had in 1973. But the hopes inspired by the siege would echo in the decades to come. Despite the chaos that followed in its wake, Wounded Knee would prove to be a turning point in the history of Native people.
We need to let the rest of the world know what was going on. 2 states over, they had no idea about Indian people. We were just invisible. We were the ones that kicked the doors open on the Indian issue and let the world see.
The good that came out of Wounded Knee was the entry into American Indian political life of people who had not been there before, who had not had a real voice. People learned they could tackle problems, create opportunities, and I think that coming out of Wounded Knee, people knew they could make a difference.
There was a lot of sense of we're important and we can do something within our own people, our own tribe, our own homes. I didn't go back to what I was doing before. I felt maybe I can do something to help not only my people, but other people too.
Native activism would spur the revitalization of Native cultures. In the years following the